Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the HR Huddle. I'm your host, Teri Zipper, CEO and Managing Partner at Sapient Insights Group, and I'm back for another exciting episode of HR We Have a Problem. This is the show where we break down the big and most relevant HR issues of the day. We like to help you make sense of what they mean for you, and we talk about what you might do about them. Joining me today is Dr. Dennis Hill. Dennis is the chairman of the board for IHRIM. He's also a co-founder of the consortium DEHR, focused on the core HR in the metaverse, which is interesting. He's got advanced degrees in engineering, business law. He's got a lot of different certifications in human resources, technology, manufacturing. He writes a lot and presents a lot. So if you haven't heard of him or read him, you need to look him up, and we'll provide some more details later on in the show. Welcome, Dennis. Great to talk to you.
Teri, it's great to be here with you. Thanks for inviting me today.
Yeah, I'm excited about this topic. We work closely with IHRIM to share our insights and research around HR technology and hopefully educate future generations of HR technologists. And Dennis and I were recently discussing the founding of IHRIM and just the importance of the community and the HR technologist role, which has obviously become pretty pivotal in HR. And I wanted to talk about how that's evolved, its growth, its development, community. Does that sound like a good plan to you, Dennis?
That sounds a good place to start, Teri.
All right, then let's get into the huddle. So I thought what might be good for the audience is maybe to talk a little bit about the history and just the backdrop for IHRIM. It's a really interesting story about how it was founded and how this group came together. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that and what the original charter was and what problems the organization was really trying to solve.
Sure. Well, IHRIM goes back now to 1980. But organizations supporting the human resource professional date back to the mid 40s or so. The interesting thing is that HR has evolved over time, even in its nomenclature when we think about the personnel office and moving that to the human resource office. And today, most of the officers that are leading the charge in their organizations have the title with the word people in it. You're the chief people officer as opposed to the chief human resource officer. All of this to direct the focus on people. And where IHRIM stepped in was a group of folks that saw the evolution of computing in the early stages as mini computers, and in the late 70s, the introduction of personal computers were going to revolutionize the way we did transactions, whether it was maintaining people's personnel files or handling the payroll. That has become really the cornerstone of the organization. What systems, what technologies make sense? And so that was a natural starting point for HR folks to get together and form this International Association for Human Resource Information Management. Up until that point, it was really it's a word I'm trying to think of. It was a nuance in the field because technology was being handled mostly by information technologists as opposed to HR technologists. Right. And so IHRIM came forward with two things. One, the opportunity to network and build this community of like-minded individuals, but also to establish some parameters, some guidelines on what an HR IT professional should know, what those knowledge domains should include. And so the second component of our mission that's continued to this day is certifying people in this field. So we are the oldest and the longest serving organization in the world that evaluates and assesses the knowledge base of HR professionals to function primarily in the data management, information management space.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And that's global, right? So you've got people around the world getting those types of certifications. And I think the other thing about this group is the community, right? It's the other like-minded individuals. People are doing the same kinds of things and really trying to find people who are running into the same problems that they have, right? Oftentimes when you're in an HR technology role, depending on the size of the organization, sometimes you're kind of an island, right?
Oh, absolutely. And what really brought this to the forefront of people's attention, both in small and medium-sized businesses, as well as enterprise, national and international companies, was COVID. The pandemic caused every business, every governmental agency to rethink its people strategy. And we've never seen as rapid an adoption of new technologies as we have over the last half a dozen years, even though thousands of companies have come and gone in the space, and some of them have been acquired, others have been replaced with better practices and better technologies. The reality is that the adoption of these technologies have to align with the business practices and the processes that are there. And without that alignment from knowledgeable people who understand the human resource aspect and the jurisdictions, see, that's where the international comes in. Things are very, very different in other countries than in the United States. And so from the very beginning, IHRIM has had an international, multi-jurisdictional perspective on the practices and the processes we use. And that really came out in a lot of the Zoom conferences that took place since March of 2020. That has really stimulated that growth in the like-minded community. And so today we have about 14,000 people in our community globally. The vast majority are still based here in the United States and Canada, but we work with, for example, the folks in Australia and Singapore, South Africa, and so forth, all around the world, and have conducted a lot of seminars and webinars in conjunction with the HR associations in those countries. And that also was a natural stepping point because for our DEHR consortium, which John Macy out of Australia and I established a couple of years before COVID, just looking at the emerging technologies such as AI and blockchain and those sorts of things and how they would impact HR technology. And then COVID hit. Everybody was joining the conversation. And that's where it's at today. Some have accused the HR field to adopt technology at an evolutionary pace, so-called pejoratively, right? At an evolutionary pace. But COVID has really stimulated the revolutionary adoption of this technology. And so traditional HR departments are no longer traditional, just like work. We're not going to go back to what work was in 2019. We've actually accelerated the pace, some think as far as 40 years ahead. Had we continued at the rate of adoption of technologies, we would have seen a lot of the things who are adopted, like what we're doing today. Zoom is just a routine process.
Right.
But broad adoption of it on the trajectory it was on, 2050 was full adoption level. And when we look at other technologies that have been adopted much faster, like 5G, everybody was expecting 5G to have about a 5 to 6 year adoption period, and it was adopted in 2 years. As some of that stimulated again more readily through COVID because people wanted more powerful phones, more secure technologies, and the ability to do more than just audio communication and texting. So all of these conversion technologies that are enabling us as people are having dramatic effects on workforces all around the world. And IHRIM, in a solitary manner, sits there really discussing things like data governance and people-driven analytics and corporate strategies, that sort of thing involving technology. It's no longer an afterthought. It really is an early thought into the HR strategic planning process in corporations of all sizes.
Yeah. And we've also seen the role of the HR technologist really evolve, right? When back in the day, when most of the implementation was on premise and things were a lot more challenging, a lot of that was IT, right? And the HR quote unquote technologist was really just somebody who was helping them understand what the requirements were for what they needed from an HR perspective. And then you sort of switch to this cloud-based solutions where now the HR technologists and their teams can do a lot of that work themselves, right? But
Right.
we're starting to see a little bit more of that shift back to IT in some regard, just because of all the, like you said, the blockchain and the 5G and AI and all of these other things that are like, okay, these are outside of my realm. How do I bring them now into HR and really seeing some of that start to involve a broader community again.
Well, HR practices have always incorporated some form of development. And most people wouldn't think that computer science and computer systems development would occur in an HR department. Yet, probably the most innovative applications of databases and spreadsheets were pioneered by people out of the need established in HR. We are the department and organizations that are responsible for the majority of governance. So those things that come out of a board of directors is translated through the HR department, because you have to determine what the impact is on your workforce, what the impact is on your overall business strategy. And nobody operates, like you said earlier, these days like an island. There are no islands. There are tides that rise and drop, and they expose different vulnerabilities of companies, for example, ransomware. You cannot afford to have your payroll system and your benefit system captured under ransomware. And so, what are the possible solutions there, and how can we benefit from those immediately so that we minimize the risk, the jeopardy to our business in such a way as makes sense? IT people focus on the technology aspect of this, whereas IT people, HR technologists, understand the impact overall on the complexion of the company and its strategic planning, its tactical implementation, and the impact of that on their workforce. Doesn't mean we operate in a bubble, because many of the things that we do too will affect the folks over in sales and marketing, the people who are in purchasing and responsible for vendor administration. Nothing today, compliments of the cloud largely, and compliments of modern communication technology, operates on at least an interface basis, if not a totally integrated basis. And so a vulnerability anywhere in the supply chain, whether that's a supply chain of product or a supply chain of people, is a vulnerability that can impact all sorts of organizations that might only have a buyer customer relationship. And that's where things get viral. That's where things get very interesting.
Yeah. Who is the typical member of IHRIM? Is there a typical portrait, or does it span the gamut of types of resources?
People get nervous when I refer to our members as peculiar, because that's not meant to be a negative term at all. They are problem solvers, oftentimes problem solvers, and we've seen that biggest transition over the last probably 20 years in the HR employee complexion, where it was primarily transactional and record keeping, highly administrative function. A lot of that has become so automated at this point and augmented not only through technology, but through artificial intelligence, that almost all of that work is going to be gone by 2030. It is really in the people analytics side, understanding what makes people more productive, what kind of commitments an organization, a business, or government agency needs to make in order to stimulate lifelong learning among their workforce, because we're at a knowledge pace today that we've never seen in the history of humankind. We're at a pace that requires everybody who wants to remain in the workforce to a reasonable retirement age needs to continue their education and professional development. Those are two separate things. So the typical HR technologist is somebody who loves the people and loves the technology. And that bipolarity has never really mapped itself into the typical HR employee. They're very people oriented, but again, transactional. And today, they're people oriented, at least the HR technologists are the people who can leverage technology and things like collaborative robotics and artificial intelligence, and then be keeping in mind the security aspects of this, especially in jurisdictions like the United States, where we don't have any data ownership laws, for example. We in HR technology need to protect that information, and we need to do so at our business level. So the problems to be solved are infinite, and the people to solve them are in great demand. And that's where IHRIM and its HRIP certification kind of establishes that floor, that minimum threshold at least, to get people into that career path. And then through continuing education programs and partnerships like we have with Sapient Insights, that help our people maintain that leading edge.
Yeah, it's one of the things I like about the community because, I mean, you can Google all you want to try to learn new things. You can take some online YouTube courses, but there's nothing like having somebody who's done it,
Mhm.
who's been through it, or is having similar experiences and sort of knowing people that you can just pick up the phone and call and have a conversation about some of these issues or challenges that you're facing. And I think they get a lot of that from being a part of a community and participating in some of the events that you guys do throughout the year.
Well, that brings us to the peculiar people remark too, because the shortest distance between identifying the problem and solving it is working with people who've been through it. And to do so with a familiarity and a trust that transcends what we would consider to be a typical vendor relationship, right? Vendors are promoting, they've got a conflict of interest. They're there to promote their products. So that vendor neutrality has always been a hallmark of IHRIM's position in terms of our relationship, both with vendors and researchers at the universities and so forth, so that that independence is there. And that's where we get into the value of birds of a feather, special interest group type organizations within our organization, sub communities within the community itself, things like time and attendance or UKG product or SAP or Oracle. They can explore that with the other users of those products and get to the answer quicker than had they not had those mentors and peers by their sides.
Yeah. Dennis, what do you see as some of the key problems HR technologists are trying to solve today? And, what are some of the things that get in their way?
Well, again, COVID stimulated new discussions and took us off into different trajectories today. Wellness has been a topic of discussion maybe since the late 1990s and an avid area of research. But today, given the episodes of pandemic and the transference of these diseases in very rapid form, it really is a challenge for businesses to have a very clear wellness and wellness response program in their organizations. Uh, Changing technology has caused a great deal of stress in the workforces psychologically, and the pressure that's been borne there. And then, of course, remote working. Not everybody agrees that remote work is ideal for them. They like being in an office, right? And the statistics kind of bear that out that they'd like to be in the office at least a few days a week, if not all days of the week. But there are people who are embracing the remote working model too. So HR is facing challenges on the accommodation side that were not driven by the extremes that we see in disabled persons, right? Disabled persons, we have to put in certain ramps and have certain works, cubicles, and things like that. The ergonomic side of that, again, is that an HR function? It ultimately is, but it's not treated that way. It's a facilities issue or a plant operations person or an office manager does those things. But an HR person who's engaged in technology would have a command of things like ergonomics and remote sensing and wellness programs that support, for example, a fuller, richer engagement of that worker within the organization. And with the number of hours we spend, regardless of the discussions in recent days on the value of a 4-day, 32-hour work week, that is not necessarily the same thing, right? And the
Yeah.
studies are out there that show mixed results. It's whatever a company chooses to adopt. And I'm not going to take a position on this. I'll simply say I've worked in organizations that have 40-hour work weeks in 4 days. 10
Right.
hour days are acceptable. People enjoy that. They like their time off. They like their longer weekends. They'll take that over a scheduled PTO any day. But see, these are the discussions that HR needs to lead, not just facilitate and leave it up to people who don't have the training, don't understand the impact, and worse off, may not even have the resource to go and discuss this with other people. So the problems, they're numerous. And then we get into where automation's coming into the picture, right? Collaborative robotics, where you see people working next to robots in a work cell and doing these things. As manufacturing comes back to the United States, more and more for various reasons, or as we're working with international jurisdictions and locations of companies, collaborative robotics are not going to go away. And this is a language that, again, HR people can either take a backseat to because they're just not interested in it or it doesn't apply in our organization. Look, the fast food restaurants are working with all sorts of new modalities that way. And HR is deeply involved in that because the impact on the entire workforce morale, hours, bonuses, all of this changes in light of the injection of new technologies into our common practices that we've had literally for decades, if not a century or more.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier just the sheer pace of technology. And yeah, technology is moving fast anyway, but at the same time, the pandemic, I think, really accelerated things, and its impact on HR has been pretty significant, especially now with the organizations, especially HR, saying, what are we going to do with this? And how are we going to use it? And what's the ethical implications of it? And how do we get the most out of it? And I think they're taking a little bit more time getting there on that topic. But I think it's going to be a place where HR can have a lot of benefit.
Well, just imagine that it took humankind 2.5 million years through our ancestors to get to the point where we could control fire to cook. And it took 66 years to go from the Wright brothers flight to landing on the moon.
Yeah, that's
And,
pretty amazing. I know.
and it used to be a doubling of knowledge up until the 20th century was almost on a century by century basis. So the knowledge would double over 100 years. And that was pretty much the way it was for the last millennia and a half. What's interesting today is that the amount of knowledge that will be produced by AI, even without AI, it was projected that we'd have enough processes among human beings to double our knowledge almost daily. AI can double knowledge in a matter of minutes at its full strength. And when we introduce, for example, into commercial marketplaces, things like quantum computers, we'll find that the thought processes, the things that we just modestly experience today with generative AI, which I call the Model Ts, the Model Ts in the knowledge era, will just go away and yield to much faster processing at a level that really humankind cannot even conceive. And
Yeah.
that may be in our lifetime. Young people like yourself would probably see that. I'm just glad to see jets landing instead of propeller planes. So
yeah, I'm old enough to know that it used to take like many computer rooms for this, right? I'm holding my cell phone in my hand. That entire, probably multiple rooms of big stack computers are now inside my little, rectangle box.
I
That
used to tell my students that the Apollo process of putting people on the moon, landing the lunar lander, taking the Saturn V, largest rocket ever made by people into space, was done with 8 PDP-8 mini computers. Now, I had one of these in my high school as a kid, and I really was attracted to it. And this is in the 70s. So I didn't intend to go into computer engineering and computer science. I certainly didn't intend to be a professor or anything like that. You get pulled in these directions based on the accidents we lead, right? To speak in philosophical terms. But 8 of these computers that had 4K of memory and magnetic tapes that you could see go back and forth, and Model 33 teletypes that would boom, 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 at most 120 characters per second at most, put people into space and on the moon. And this has at least 5 magnitudes of power well beyond that in the power of in our hands.
Yeah.
And so to say that not knowing technology, not embracing technology is somehow an acceptable way of living in the 21st century, it cannot be avoided. We can't evade it. And so the great thing is workforces are always going to be here, right? Well, at least always in terms of maybe the next century. But you know what's going to happen this year? People being born potentially at the early stages of this century may see the 22nd century in much greater numbers than people born in the early 1900s living to today. And that's because of, again, AI adoption. I have to mention that AI's least accepted adoption so far against all the industries, least at 15% healthcare. We hear a lot about it because it's so innovative, but it's highly regulated too.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about where the law comes down on AI, and we talk about where ethics should be, and we talk about where leadership and HR needs to be in the future, all of this is going to come to roost at a point right there on HR's desk. And if you're not aware of the technology and the impact, it really won't matter what regulatory does. You just have to respond to it or react to it. Ethics is critical. What makes an AI application an ethical application? And again, these are things that some HR associations, and I don't mind mentioning HRCI, requires as part of your certification renewal an ethics course. We don't compete with SHRM and HRCI in the certification space. The IHRIM approach is to extend your knowledge from what would be considered traditional HR into the tech space, and then to build your career along that way. We could all sit around the dining room table and agree that you cannot escape technology. And as far as regulatory goes, the law has always lagged technology. So it's going to be those people with the vision, the problem solving skills, the people who can foresee the strategic impact of certain technologies and practices that are going to lead that charge. And that's traditionally not come out of the technical side of the business. We have CIOs and CTOs, but they, apart from some analytics components that are out there, very few of them rise to the office of, say, a CEO. But many CHROs do go on to become CEOs of companies and or spin off their businesses for themselves. The people matter. The people are always going to matter.
Yeah. You talked about the community having some peculiarities, people being curious. I think those are like some of the, I guess, not really criteria, but some of the things you'd expect to see from somebody who wants to be an HR technologist. Is there some other, from a career development perspective, if somebody's listening to this and say, this is interesting, I'd like to get more involved in being an HR technologist, what would you say to them?
Oh, I would challenge them with a homework assignment.
Okay.
Go get a free login on OpenAI ChatGPT and type in what are the characteristics of a person pursuing a career in HR technology. I know that sounds a bit flippant, but it's actually an interesting exercise because it would expose you to interactive AI, generative AI in a free way and answer your question. However, it still comes down to fundamentally people in this field need to like people. There's no room for being the nerd in the corner. That just doesn't exist. In fact, almost without exception, I can't think of an exception to the rule. The people I have met in the HRIT space, unlike the people I've met in the computer engineering space over my lifetime or other fields that are highly technical and STEM oriented, and I believe HR, particularly with the IT specialty, the technology orientation, is a STEM field. They are people persons first and foremost. So you have to have the soft skills. You have to be able to get along with people and yet embrace with that natural curiosity that you talked about earlier. Technology, Omni's no longer printed, but you're the kind of person that would pick up an Omni magazine or cruise the web and check out the Reddit discussions or watch YouTube videos on how can I improve the performance of my laptop. Little things like that matter. Now, do people do that eternally? Of course not. They have their priorities. But to try to improve the productivity and the wellness of a workforce, that takes somebody who's a polymath, somebody who can see the bigger picture through a number of different angles. And HR people, especially HRIT people, need to be concerned with everything. People say, well, what about your education? Look at the background you have. Yeah, well, I have a law degree and I have an engineering degree and I have a business degree and I have technology degrees and certifications. And not just in the HR space, but also in manufacturing engineering education. These are all different places you're going to go. And as a committed person to lifelong learning, I can tell you that the greatest force for progress is education and training. That's personal, that's professional, that's societal, that's business. The greatest force for progress is through that process of gaining new knowledge, unskilling things, upskilling things, and then tying that all together through this thread of natural curiosity and the pursuit of solving problems, because every day we have problems. HRIT people are exactly the kind of people you want to have on a problem solving team, sometimes even if it has nothing to do with HR, but they don't really have the time to do that. But it'd be really great because most of them will sit there and tell you that no problem is unsolvable. I love talking about that. Absolutely no problem presented to humankind is unsolvable with the mental capacity, the problem solving insights we have as people. We just have to put the team together and work towards that end.
Yeah. Yeah, you do tend to see people in these roles have a lot of different activities throughout their career, kind of have an interesting understanding of the human condition in general, and they're people watchers, right? So they kind of see what's happening and they can start to think about how to put that into motion, if you will, through technology. But I definitely like your background, see people that just have done a lot of different things and sort of somehow navigate or migrate to HR and HR technology.
And it's always the basics, right? My publisher and editor of a couple of my books, she would say, "So why are you doing what you're doing?" I mean, she knew I was going to write these books for small business people and so forth. And I said, "I really don't know why. I just feel like sharing the experience that I've had with working with students, working with companies, working with professionals, working with associations. There's a lot of common thread there in the problem solving process, not necessarily in the end result or the technology or the specific path to get there, but the process itself." And she said, "Well, writing books is a really simple matter of recognizing that you're a writer." Well, that was never on my business card. I was never hired to be a writer. You know what I'm saying? It's just like I never
Yeah.
thought of that. And so in HR, you might be the problem solver, you might be the parapsychologist that day or the parasocial worker, you might be the counselor, you might be the disciplinarian, the procedure enforcer, and all those things come together in that person who will all, and this is what makes it a peculiar group. I'm going to go back to probably title this peculiar people, right? This will all come back to understanding that really only a few people possess the innate abilities. The innate abilities. They're born to this. It's a natural flow for them. They feel comfortable in this zone where other people avoid conflict, and therefore conflict resolution is unimportant to them. They'll deal with it in a very terse way if they must. That sort of thing is what I'm talking about, Terry.
Yeah.
You feel drawn into this because of a natural thing. And we see that too. I mean, many people who worked in old personnel, current HR, future people offices are people who may not have even graded well in a college environment or even got a degree.
Right.
And today, even organizations and publishers like US News and World Report agree that sometimes the return on investment is not a college degree, but found in a series of very well-defined certifications.
Yeah.
And the military does that, for example. They have something called the COOL program, which transitions military to civilian service. And to get there, they want to take their real life experiences in the military, no college degrees, just a lot of great experience, and get them recognized in the private sector through certifications. It's a wonderful program. And we're proud to be a part of that, along with organizations like IHRIM and so forth. So experience matters.
Yeah, definitely they're a bit of a unicorn, I think. I'm wondering, what do you think CHROs and HR leaders need to know or understand about technology and the people that are kind of guiding that within their organization? Is there thinking that, they need to have to make sure that those people are nurtured and deliver on the kind of work that they need from a people perspective?
That's a great question, Terry. It's one that begs a long answer because it's got to be part of the strategic focus of the organization itself, not just in how it builds its HR teams, but even how they interact. There are many multinational organizations that have decentralized HR throughout, and they're located everywhere. They have very little reason or rhyme, so to speak, to bring them all together. And yet there's great power in that collaboration, even within the enterprise itself. So CHROs need, I think, some of the skills that would qualify you for that position that would not have qualified you in the past are things like ethical AI. It's not a production, manufacturing, engineering sort of thing when we're talking about it impacting the workforce. And everything should and will when it comes to technology, whether you're including AI by itself or you're embedding things like collaborative robotics or even the security issues. So
Yeah.
ethics is important. Data governance and data ownership. Well, again, every decision by a corporation extends you into an area of liability and legal jeopardy that you might not have been familiar with in the past. So it's important to keep those things in mind. And organizational CHROs, and I'm talking enterprise class, small businesses, let's say a small business in Texas looking to expand itself and might want to set up a shop across the border of Mexico for manufacturing and cost reduction purposes, have multi-jurisdictional issues. So this is not something that an SMB, a small to mid-sized business, shouldn't be concerned about either. In fact, if they have any goals as entrepreneurs and founders of the organization or family holders, which a lot of businesses are in this country, to grow, that scalability factor is going to critically depend on the HR component of the business. So your lucky cousin that's sitting there filling out the forms and maintaining the files and running payroll every other week is going to have to grow as that company scales. And scalability is key. And of course, that HR component is critical to that, probably more so now than ever before, because workforce talent acquisition, for example, undergoing great deals of change, talent development within the organization has shown now this digression or this bifurcation of roles. I'm more of a traditional HR, core HR, but you know what? Your human capital management system has to be concerned with HR development. So you have HR people in the core area, and then you have the HR development people, which are looking at training and continuing education issues, the wellness programs and stuff like that. And they're all in the same boat. They're all in the same boat. And so the CHRO needs to recognize that and invest in the continuing education and professional development of their staff.
Yeah, completely agree. I think that's the critical element of anybody in HR at this point, and the CHRO's responsibility is pretty heavy there. Well, I think this has been a great conversation. I'm really excited about the community, and I think if people are listening to this and thinking about being in HR technology, or they're in HR technology and they don't have a community, this is definitely something that they should look into and look at the opportunity of being a part of it. One of the questions I usually ask as a last question is one thing we might leave the audience with. And I know you've already given them a homework assignment, which I totally love. But is there anything else that you might leave the audience with some insight around the HR technologist or their future career in HR technology, or just something that they need to be thinking about if they're in that space?
It's like anything that's a struggle, Teri. All good things are a struggle. And when you look at the technology, it's not funneling into something, it's expanding like this. And that whole knowledge increasing augmentation, that's inevitable. It's already happening. The HR technologist could be that technology major. It could be that computer science or computer engineering person that just feels this passion for people and working with people that has traditionally, it's syncretic. You typically don't have people persons and technology persons, right?
Yeah.
They were diverse. But if you're in that middle, if you're in that Venn diagram center, I would encourage you to go for it wholeheartedly and learn as much as you can and stay abreast of what you can so that you can be that problem solver for life. And I mean, of all the characters in Lord of the Rings, who wouldn't like to be the wizard, right?
Of course.
Everybody wants to be the wizard. The HR technology people, whether you like it or not, you're the wizards. So I would leave you with that encouragement that if you're going to be a wizard, be the best wizard you can possibly be.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if you're not in HR today, I'd say, one of the things I've been talking about on some of my previous episodes is different staff functions really starting to integrate more, whether you're integrating with your finance team or your marketing team and learning about what's happening in other parts of the business. So you bring that back to, or you bring that into HR for a better understanding of how the business makes its money and how it sells products or solutions. And, all of those things matter when you start thinking about people and the way that they work and how they get their jobs done, but also how they're nurtured by the organization.
Nurturing's key. Absolutely. I totally agree with you, Teri.
Yeah, love it. Well, thank you, Dennis, for joining today. It's been a great conversation. Where can people find you online? Because I know you've got a lot of stuff out there people ought to check out and do some reading and listen to some of your other webinars and things.
Well, a good place to go is everybody's memorializing things on LinkedIn these days. I tell you to go to oldsheldon.com, but that's not up and launched yet.
Make a mental note then.
It is. Yeah, it'll be there. A lot of things in common with that character to the point where I thought, you know what, if they've done a prequel, they'll probably do a sequel. So why not grab the domain early, right? Small, medium-sized businesses might find the books that I've co-authored and edited on Amazon.com. LinkedIn, like I said, is a good place to start. And then, of course, IHRIM. I would not be here today if it was not because of my affiliation with IHRIM. I've been on the board since 2019. We've taken it through a lot of stages and changes. And our partnerships with your organization and others have just blossomed wonderfully and exactly where we feel we need to position ourselves for the next 43 years. So thank you very much. Check us out at ihrim.org.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Dennis. And thanks to our producers, Brand Method Media Group, our marketing team, who's going to get this out there for you guys to hear. And thank you for tuning in. That's all the time we have for this week's episode of HR We Have a Problem. If you enjoyed it, you can subscribe to it on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you'd leave us a review or let us know what topics you might want to hear about. You can also drop us a line on the website via chat, give us some information there. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of HR We Have a Problem. Thanks, everybody.